You wake up on a Monday, stare at your calendar, and feel absolutely nothing. No panic, no drive, just a dull, paralyzing why. The emails? Pointless. The meetings? Noise. That vision board taped to your wall? It might as well belong to a stranger. You used to care, fiercely, but now, nothing moves you. Not success, not approval, not even survival. What the hell just happened? Brittany used to be the kind of woman who had a 5-year plan and a backup plan for that plan. She wakes up before her alarm, nails done, calendar, color-coded, cardio at 6:30 sharp. A senior project manager at a tech firm, climbing fast. Everyone said she was going places, and she was. Until one morning she just stopped. It was a Tuesday. She stared at her laptop, opened Slack, and watched the messages pile in. Deadlines, updates, team goals. She closed it. Not from stress, but from this strange, absolute disinterest. Like someone had cut the cord between her and the life she'd spent 10 years building. Her boyfriend proposed last month, something she'd been waiting for. But instead of joy, she felt blank. Not because she doesn't love him, but because the whole thing, the dress, the vows, the photo-perfect life, suddenly felt like performance art. She said yes, smiled for Instagram, and now she's planning a wedding that feels like it belongs to someone else. I used to be so driven, she told me, tears welling up. Now I can barely care about anything. My family thinks I'm depressed. My friends say I'm being dramatic. But I'm not sad. I'm just gone. Like someone turned off a switch inside me and I don't know how to turn it back on. Her days blur. Meetings feel like noise. Every goal she once chased feels lifeless, like cardboard cutouts in a role she can't play anymore. What Brittany doesn't realize is that Carl Jung studied this exact experience for decades. He called it a psychic turning point. Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. A quiet rupture where the ego loses power and the self begins to emerge. If any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not unraveling, you're crossing a threshold. What looks like emptiness on the surface is often the first sign that something deeper is trying to emerge. Now let's unpack what's actually happening beneath that silence. One day you suddenly stop caring. The title on your desk, the salary in your account, the relationship that once looked perfect in photos, none of it moves you. You go through the motions, but inside you've disconnected. Something snapped, and what's left is a strange emotional flatline. People around you call it burnout, but that's not it. This is existential, structural. The ego has lost its grip. For years you believed you were your ambition. You identified with your productivity, your charm, your reputation. You curated a self that could survive in the world and maybe even impress it. But when a spiritual awakening hits, that identity begins to rot from the inside. It doesn't collapse loudly, it disintegrates quietly, and what's left is a growing void. Carl Jung warned about this moment, when the persona, the mask you wore to navigate the world, can no longer contain the truth emerging underneath. And when it cracks, so do your motivations. You don't want more. You don't want better. You don't want anything. Because the false self doesn't want what the soul needs. The danger here is misdiagnosis. People call it laziness, apathy, midlife crisis. But it's deeper. You're standing at the ruins of an identity that no longer serves you. You're not broken, you've outgrown the lie. But without a new truth to replace it, all that remains is silence. Heavy, disorienting silence. And for now, that's all there is. At first, it was seamless. You adapted, spoke the right way, fit into rooms, absorbed expectations. Not because you were fake, but because survival required it. Careers demand polish. Relationships reward likability. Society applauds conformity, dressed as charm. So you learned the script. Not to deceive, but to belong. Over time, that adaptation calcifies. The persona becomes a second skin, efficient, polished, socially acceptable. But as your inner life awakens, that skin begins to suffocate. The mask that once protected now feels like a muzzle. You begin to feel friction in places that once felt smooth. Your words hesitate. Your energy drops. You lose the ability to keep up appearances, not out of apathy, but because your nervous system rejects what no longer aligns. Carl Jung saw this moment as a breaking point in individuation, when the self begins to rebel against the image it was forced to maintain. This isn't rebellion, but a psychological necessity. Your system starts rejecting scripted interactions. You grow silent in places that once excited you. Emails feel like emotional debt. Small talk becomes unbearable. What's dying isn't your motivation, it's the identity that used to power it. You're not lazy, uninspired, or lost. You're simply no longer able to outsource your sense of self to roles you've outgrown. And when the persona dissolves, what remains is unnervingly quiet, which is the real self, still forming, not yet ready to speak. No one tells you that awakening doesn't feel like enlightenment, it feels like being hollowed out. One day, the scaffolding of your life, your goals, beliefs, even your identity, starts to dissolve, and what's left isn't clarity. It's silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that echoes, the kind that makes you question if you've lost something essential, your drive, your direction, your purpose. Friends don't see it. You still show up, not on cue, reply to texts. But inside, something is gone, and you're not sure what took its place. This is the part no one prepares you for. The collapse isn't dramatic. It's quiet, invisible to most. But internally you're dismantling decades of borrowed purpose. Carl Jung called this the night sea journey, a descent into the unconscious, where old structures break down to make space for something authentic. But that transition is disorienting. Without the goals that once motivated you, life feels mechanical. You go through motions with no emotional signature. It almost feels like depression, but it's not. It's a deep internal recalibration. And because it doesn't fit any common narrative, not grief, not burnout, not crisis, it goes unnamed. You begin to think something is wrong with you. In truth, something false is dying, and its death mimics failure. But that sense of loss is not regression, it's the soul pulling rank on the personality. This crisis isn't a breakdown. It's an initiation, subtle, painful, and necessary. The old scaffolding falls, but the real foundation hasn't surfaced yet. You used to wake up with a plan, clear, linear, measurable. The ego thrived on it. Goals to hit, status to chase, problems to solve. It gave you the illusion of control. That was its job, to keep your sense of identity intact by managing the outer world. Promotions, image, performance, a curated life that looked like progress. Then something shifted. You stopped feeling driven, but not because you were tired, because your inner compass stopped aligning with external reward. What you're experiencing is the breakdown of ego dominance. Carl Jung warned of this moment. The self, the deeper, more authentic organizing center of the psyche, begins to rise. And it doesn't negotiate. Where the ego wants safety, validation, and legacy, the self wants integration, wholeness, truth, even if it costs you everything else. The tension between these two forces creates a motivational collapse. You no longer want what the ego wants, but the self hasn't revealed its direction yet. You're in limbo, unable to move forward using the old fuel, yet still blind to the new one. This is the real psychological war. The ego resists losing control. It panics. It tries to resurrect your former desires. But you can't fake hunger for goals you've outgrown. You feel stuck, but what's really happening is a shift in authorship, from the constructed self to the authentic one. Motivation doesn't die, it gets reassigned. But until the self speaks clearly, silence is the only honest state you can inhabit. You think you're just tired, but sleep doesn't help. Rest feels like avoidance. The usual fixes, routines, planning, productivity hacks fall flat. You're not just low on energy, your energy is being redirected, inward, quietly, relentlessly. This is what happens when the shadow shows up. Jung defined the shadow as everything you've disowned in yourself. The envy, the arrogance, the rage, the needs you learn to hide to stay loved, accepted, safe. When spiritual awakening begins, it tears the lid off your unconscious. Repressed emotions surface, old wounds reopen, and suddenly, you're not fighting the world, you're fighting your own inner fragmentation. Doing shadow work isn't a weekend ritual. It's metabolically demanding. Psychic energy that once fueled your external goals is now consumed by inner processing. And it's not glamorous. There's no dopamine rush, no gold star, just emotional fog, fatigue, and a quiet unraveling of who you thought you were. Motivation doesn't vanish. It's rerouted into the heavy lifting of self-confrontation. Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites, the ability to endure contradiction without rushing to fix or escape it. But the body keeps the score. Fatigue isn't a failure. It's a symptom of real psychological work. You're not lazy. You're in reconstruction. Every part of you that was denied, moralized, or buried is surfacing, not to destroy you, but to be seen. And until that reckoning is complete, the self will not release your energy for anything less than truth. In this process of reconstruction, becoming yourself requires first becoming no one. To build a soul-directed life, you'll first have to let go of everything that made you socially functional. The borrowed dreams, the roles you played too well, the script you followed without question. This in-between state is disorienting. Nothing fits, but nothing replaces it. You feel unmoored. Not broken, not in crisis, just strangely absent from your own life. This is the beginning of individuation. In Jungian psychology, individuation is the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not optimized, but real. It's the integration of all the fragmented parts of your psyche into a coherent, autonomous self. That work is invisible to others. It's slow, non-linear, and often feels like nothing is happening. But beneath the silence, the architecture of a new inner world is being formed. Detachment is part of it. The goals that once energized you now feel foreign because they were never fully yours. The social mask is crumbling. The persona no longer protects, it constrains. You can't go back. But you don't yet know what forward looks like, and that's the hardest part. You're not lost, you're being reassembled. But the ego doesn't recognize the terrain, so it panics. It calls this emptiness failure. The self knows better. In this phase, you can't reattach. You're simply meant to outgrow. Individuation demands nothing less than the death of the familiar and the birth of the authentic. What looks like collapse is actually a refusal to lie. A turning inward that doesn't need an answer, only time and truth. Western culture thrives on forward motion. Schedules packed to the minute. Metrics defining your worth. You wake, produce, repeat, with barely a moment to question what it's all for. In this system, stillness is treated like failure. If you slow down, you're seen as lazy, depressed, or broken. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Compulsive productivity often masks a deeper kind of deadness. Carl Jung warned against this. He called it a compulsion to perform, a defense against inner confrontation. The ego builds routines, goals, and external identities to avoid facing what's unresolved beneath. Workaholism becomes a distraction. Constant motion prevents reflection. Many high-functioning people are emotionally shut down, but appear driven on the outside. This right here is avoidance cloaking as ambition. Modern society doesn't just normalize this state, it rewards it. The more you suppress your inner life, the more praise you receive for being motivated. But that praise reinforces the disconnect. You start living for appearances while feeling hollow inside. And when that hollow space finally catches up with you, when you can't fake the energy anymore, you assume something is wrong. The system breaks at this point because it was never built on truth. Real growth is cyclical, not linear. It includes rest, withdrawal, rebuilding. In Jungian terms, the soul rejects the lie of endless motion because real transformation happens in stillness, not in acceleration. Eventually, the psyche demands authenticity, not output. And when it does, everything artificial falls apart. Jung didn't just study dreams and archetypes, he turned to alchemy, the old language of transformation, to describe what happens deep within the soul. Not literal gold-making, but psychological alchemy, a coded map of inner rebirth. At the core of this map are three stages: nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, each representing a distinct movement of the psyche. It begins with nigredo, the blackening. Here, everything familiar collapses. You feel lost, disoriented, sometimes deeply ashamed. It's the stage of breakdown, not just of your life structure, but your identity. Meaning dissolves, drive evaporates. The ego fights to hold on, but loses its grip. This is where most people panic. But Jung saw it as sacred, the necessary chaos before any real integration can begin. Next is albedo, the whitening. Clarity returns in fragments. You begin to separate your true values from inherited ones. You notice the quiet parts of yourself, intuition, dreams, forgotten desires, and realize they were speaking all along. The psyche begins its slow cleansing, not by fixing, but by facing. Finally, rubedo, the reddening. Integration. Energy returns not through adrenaline, but alignment. You no longer seek purpose, you become it. The self no longer whispers, it acts. Most people never move past nigredo because they mistake it for failure. But in Jung's system, it's the beginning of everything. The darkness isn't the end. It's the raw material for transformation. You're not unraveling, you're being refined. In a world obsessed with achievement, goals, and 5-year plans, the quiet act of inner listening feels like failure. When external motivation dries up, people scramble for replacement purposes, new projects, new identities, new missions to chase. But the real task post-awakening isn't to find something to do, it's to learn how to listen again. Jung believed that the self, the totality of who you are, speaks constantly, but in a different language. It doesn't communicate through logic or language. It speaks through dreams, synchronicities, symbols, sudden aversions, and persistent obsessions. But to hear it, you have to stop broadcasting and start receiving. That means silence, attention, a willingness to not know. This involves a shift in orientation, from willful striving to receptive awareness. You begin by tracking your dreams, not interpreting them like puzzles, but watching them the way you'd watch weather. You notice patterns, repeating themes. You record stray thoughts, images that won't let go, physical reactions to environments or people. These are signals, faint but precise. Eventually, they converge, and something inside begins to move again, not out of pressure but resonance. In this phase, you cease to chase purpose and start to align with it. When you stop expecting direction to come from outside, you create space for the self to guide from within. The result isn't instant certainty. It's internal coherence. That's the new compass. And it never comes from force. It arrives the moment you're quiet enough to hear it. There comes a point when the systems you once served, productivity, recognition, external success, no longer compel you. You didn't become lazy. You don't lack goals. Something deeper has simply taken the wheel. Jung called it the emergence of the self, a center of gravity that operates outside the rules of societal conditioning. What once felt like motivation now feels like manipulation. Deadlines, praise, competition, they don't move you anymore because they're not rooted in anything real. You start noticing how much of your past ambition was wired to appease an invisible audience. Parents, bosses, social media, the culture at large, all of it transactional, all of it hollow. When the self begins to awaken, your ambition doesn't disappear. It evolves. It turns inward. You feel called to work that reflects who you are, not just what the market demands. Vocation, not career. Expression, not projection. What energizes you now is alignment, when your outer actions match your inner reality. This doesn't mean rejecting the world, it means refusing to serve it blindly. You're not here to be efficient, you're here to be whole. Real motivation reemerges, but this time it's guided by internal authority. Quiet, steady, unmistakable. And here's the paradox. When you stop performing for the system, you often end up contributing something far more valuable to it. Because what you're offering isn't compliance, it's authenticity. You don't push your way through this, you survive it, sit in it, let it undo you. Because the moment you stop trying to fix the void, something unexpected begins to shift. Not with force, but with time. What the modern world calls laziness or depression is often a soul in hibernation, waiting for the noise to die down so it can speak again. Eventually, without warning, motivation stirs. Not loud, not dramatic. A whisper, maybe? A small pull toward something simple but alive. A book you feel like reading. A walk that feels good. A conversation that feels real. And for the first time in a long time, you follow it. Not out of habit, but because it feels right. This is how the soul returns, not in fireworks, but in fragments. The heaviness begins to lift, your decisions become lighter, cleaner. You don't over-explain yourself anymore. You don't need a 5-step plan to justify your existence. You move when it's time to move. And you're still when stillness is needed. Meaning reappears. So does direction. But now it's yours. Not inherited. Not borrowed. You're no longer enacting life, you're inhabiting it. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of an entirely new one led not by control, but by coherence. At this point, you're not chasing motivation anymore. You're responding to something deeper that has been trying to reach you. You've stepped outside the frame. The architecture of your former life, roles, ambitions, routines still exists, but you no longer inhabit it in the same way. The scaffolding is visible now, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. What dies in awakening is not motivation. It's compulsion, the reflex to chase what no longer resonates, the hunger to prove yourself in systems that don't know what to do with your inner life. Carl Jung called this descent into disorientation the essential path of individuation. Not a detour, not a disorder, a rupture that reorganizes. And what emerges isn't some blissful upgrade, it's a deeper responsibility. To live with inner authority. To answer to something far more demanding than external success, the truth of who you are becoming. No one applauds you for this work. There's no medal for shedding the mask. But eventually, motivation returns, quieter, cleaner, surgically precise. It doesn't roar, it points, and suddenly you no longer need clarity to move, you just need to listen. The self doesn't shout, it waits, and now, so do you. If anything in this video feels uncomfortably familiar, then you're not alone in this. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the one thing you used to be passionate about that now feels completely meaningless? I go through the comments and I want to know where you are in this process. In subsequent videos, I'll be doing a deep exploration of Jung's most powerful psychological concepts that nobody else is talking about. I'll be breaking down Jung's shadow work and why most people are doing it completely wrong. So hit the subscribe button and turn on post notifications if you don't want to miss this. Your old self is dead. Your new self is being born. But you don't have to stumble through this blindly. Remember, what feels like your breakdown is actually your breakthrough. See you in the next one.